All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're uncovering what is arguably one of the bloodiest and yet most deliberately buried episodes of racial violence in U.S. history. While we've rightfully learned a lot about the 1921 events in Tulsa, the history we're unpacking today has been almost entirely erased from public memory. It's this incredibly complex mix of labor rights, racial violence, and ultimately a landmark legal battle.
Picture this. It's late September 1919. A simple, basic demand for fair agricultural prices somehow turns Phillips County, this rural area in Arkansas, into a literal killing field. To really understand history, we have to look at the facts on the ground. And what went down here is not just tragic, it's absolutely crucial to understanding American history.
What's really wild to consider here is the massive, jarring contrast between the official story and the actual truth. For decades, the media sold the public this completely fake narrative of a dangerous black uprising. But the documented reality? It was a brutal massacre specifically meant to crush legitimate labor organizing.
To really grasp the scale of this distortion, just think about the official numbers. When the violence finally ended, the government's official casualty count for white individuals was exactly 5.
But, and this is a massive but, when you look at survivor accounts and rigorous modern historical research, a staggering discrepancy emerges. These sources place the true number of black men, women, and children murdered at well over 200, with some estimates reaching even higher. The gap between 5 and over 200, well, that's the space where the truth was hidden.
Section 1. The Sharecroppers Trap. Let's look at the economic exploitation that actually lit the match here.
Down in Phillips County, black sharecroppers and tenant farmers were basically caught in a completely rigged game, a vicious cycle of perpetual debt. They were systematically denied fair prices for their cotton by white landowners. They were doing the hard work, generating all the wealth, but the terms were set up so they could literally never get ahead financially. The extreme economic inequality of that moment is just staggering. White landowners were pocketing a massive 95% of the profits. That left a tiny little 5% sliver for the black farmers who were actually out there breaking their backs in the fields. This extreme imbalance is exactly what forced these farmers to make the incredibly risky decision to organize. They were fighting for their very survival. So, with their backs against the wall, they took action. They formed the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America, and they started holding meetings at a church in Spur, right outside Elaine, Arkansas. And importantly, they had armed guards stationed outside that church. Why? Because they had already been facing severe ongoing death threats just for trying to demand a fairer price for their crops.
Section 2. Bloodshed at Spur. And this is where things rapidly spiral into an absolute nightmare.
It all kicks off with a sudden confrontation outside that church. You've got the Union Guards on one side and local white law enforcement plus a railroad detective on the other. Gunfire erupts. One white man is killed, another wounded. And that single, isolated event was instantly weaponized as the ultimate excuse for massive retaliation.
Almost instantly, this wild, completely false rumor spreads like wildfire, claiming a full-blown black uprising is happening. This deliberate distortion acted like an alarm bell. It drew hundreds of armed white men from Arkansas, Mississippi, and beyond. Local posses were deputized, and shockingly, roughly 500 U.S. Army troops from Camp Pike were actually deployed to the area and participated in the violence. Section 3. The Insurrection Cover-Up. Because what followed wasn't an investigation, it was a coordinated cover-up.
You really have to consider the unbelievable double standard of the justice system here. On one hand, absolutely 0 white individuals were arrested or charged for the widespread killings. None. Meanwhile, hundreds of black residents were thrown in jail, and many were mercilessly tortured into giving false confessions just to prop up that fake uprising narrative. And out of those hundreds arrested, 12 black men, who later became known as the Elaine 12, were rushed through these total sham, mob-dominated trials. They were rapidly convicted of murder. The verdicts were basically decided before they even stepped foot in the courtroom. All 12 men were swiftly sentenced to death.
Here's the thing. This whole atrocity would have literally been erased from history, swept completely under the rug, if not for brave journalists like Ida B. Wells Barnett. In 1920, she published a pamphlet called The Arkansas Race Riot. She went down there, investigated the facts directly, interviewed the Elaine 12, and exposed the agonizing truth to the entire world. Section 4. A landmark legal victory.
From this absolute nightmare, a fight for survival actually ends up rewriting American law.
The battle to save the Elaine 12 didn't just end at the state level. It was pushed all the way up to the highest court in the land, reaching the U.S. Supreme Court in 1923. The case was Moore versus Dempsey.
And this ruling was a total game changer. The Supreme Court basically declared that federal courts now had the expanded power to review state criminal trials. This officially allowed them to step in, check mob-dominated legal proceedings, and actually enforce a defendant's constitutional due process rights. It was a monumental civil rights victory born out of absolute tragedy.
Section 5. The cost of erasure. So why does pulling this specific buried chapter of history out of the shadows matter so much today?
When you connect all these dots, it's like a giant puzzle coming together. We see exactly how the economic exploitation of vulnerable workers, when combined with deliberate media manipulation, can spark devastating violence. And we understand exactly why fighting for legal accountability matters so deeply, because it's pretty much the only way to keep that power in check.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with this one thought. Just look at the sheer scale of this event. Hundreds dead, massive military involvement, and a Supreme Court case that fundamentally reshaped American law. If an event this huge can just disappear from public memory for decades, what other vital historical truths are we currently missing? Keep questioning, keep seeking the facts, and I'll catch you in the next one.